Hello, everyone, and welcome to another beautiful game. This one from the penultimate round of the Fujairah Global Tournament 2025, and it is Armenian Grandmaster Aram Hakobyan versus Vasyl Ivanchuk, the legend. We check up on him every now and then, but when he's playing, anything interesting, then we just show it because that's how this channel is run. And interestingly, this is the first time we're showing a game from Aram Hakobyan, and I found out that he was born on the April 1st, which I imagine was a lot of fun growing up. His birthdays must have been really, something else. You imagine you invite people and then no one shows up, and then you're like sad, and everyone is, April Fool's Day or something. So I don't know if they do that in Armenia, but yeah, probably. It could be a lot of fun, to troll someone like that. But yeah, getting back to the game, it's pretty wild. They've burned all of their time fairly quickly, and is just impossible to calculate what these guys have played here. So let's dive straight into it. Aram with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to c5 by Vasyl, knight to f3, pawn to d6, and pawn to d4. So a standard open Sicilian. C captures, we have knight captures and knight to f6, knight to c3 and a6. We have the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian, where I often like to say that every move is a move. Whichever move you make with white, unless it's maybe king to e2, will have a name, and there's theory behind it. So here we have bishop to e3. It is the English attack, and there are a couple of ways you could play it. Pawn to e5 being the most popular, pawn to e6. Vasyl goes for knight to g4, and if you play the English bishop to the English attack against the Najdorf, you have to know the knight g4 reply, because it just happens very often. And usually you'll just see bishop g5, h6, bishop to h4, bishop to pawn to g5, bishop g3, and bishop g7, and the game continues. And usually the games are a lot of fun. But here, after knight to g4, Aram goes back, bishop to c1, and Vasyl goes back as well, knight to f6, because even though it might seem like you won a tempo, you're also going to face either h3 or bishop to e2, and you're going to have to move the knight back. So Vasyl brings it back, knight to e4, knight to f6, bishop back to e3, and okay, Vasyl repeats, knight to g4. He says, I'm not completely against a draw with black, on move 8, but of course it would be a crime against chess if you actually committed this with white. So bishop to g5, h6, and you're probably thinking, okay, we're going into that line, bishop to h4, bishop to g3, g5, bishop g7, and so on. But no, bishop back to c1. Okay, but now it's a little bit different because there's already a pawn on h6. So Vasyl goes back, knight to f6, and now if you just went back bishop to e3, you would actually be down a tempo, as there's a pawn on h6. So bishop to d3, you have to make something out of it. Pawn to e6 and castles kingside, and this is already incredibly rare territory. There are some games where bishop to e7 was played. Bishop to d7 is what Vasyl goes for, and it is now as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So okay, king h1, another standard idea. You get the king off of this diagonal so you don't blunder a check in the future, and you prepare pawn to f4, pawn to f5. You go after the black king, try to open up the f file for the rook, and so on. We have knight to c6, knight d to e2, declining the trade and now preparing to push the f pawn. And Vasyl says not today and plays pawn to g5. And it doesn't really stop pawn to f4. If anything, it invites it. However, Aram did not play it. You could play it captures, and then okay, you get the semi-open f file. Vasyl will get the semi-open g file, and you get a nice interesting game. But he decided to go knight g3, and now Vasyl plays pawn to g4. Again, inviting pawn to f4, but now after pawn to f4, you don't have to capture en passant. You play pawn to h5. This is what Vasyl played. We have bishop to e3, pawn to h4 challenging the knight, and now knight to e2. We have pawn to b5, now preparing pawn to b4. Pawn to a3, stopping pawn to b4, or maybe not stopping it, but making it at least a little bit less likely that it will be played. Queen to c7 and queen to d2. Okay, both players developed their queen. Bishop to e7, Vasyl still saying, I might castle queenside, I might castle kingside, I might castle, not at all. So we'll see what happens. Rook 8 to d1, and now rook to c8. We have king to g1. Now just stepping off of that h file, because it's not impossible that, let's say, this knight comes to h5, then you sacrifice it via knight g3, and then something like captures. This opens up with check, and you might end up in a lot of trouble. So the king is safer here on g1. And while you could play pawn to b4 here, and it's definitely the top move recommended by the engine, Vasyl first goes rook to g8. We have queen to e1 now, going after the pawn. And now you could just go back, rook to h8. And with so many moves being repeated this game, I thought, okay, it's definitely what he played. But no, now Vasyl goes for pawn to b4. We have a captures on b4, knight captures on b4, and now comes bishop to d4. And the pawn on h4, you definitely should capture it, but it's still very tricky. You go right under the mask of the bishop, and after knight captures on e4, you have to find queen h6, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot. And now after, okay, you have to do something about the knight hanging on e4. So let's say you capture on c3, b captures. Let's say knight captures on d3, c captures, and there's really not a lot of problems here for white to deal with, regarding black attacking or anything. It's a perfectly fine position. Everything is nicely defended, and white will now start the attack. You'll go knight d4, put pressure on e6, pawn to f5 is coming. So it's actually a very, very nice position. Material is equal, but it's definitely not bad for white. But okay, you have the bishop pair to worry about, so extremely double-edged. But okay, after knight captures on b4, bishop to d4 by Aram, pawn to h3 now, challenging the white king's defenses, and pawn to g3. Maybe a bit too ambitious. Knight to g3 also isn't, to just be discarded. Allowing h captures on g2 seems scary, but after, let's say, rook f2 or king captures on g2, white is doing very much okay. But after h3, g3 was played, and now this diagonal becomes extremely weak. And you could challenge it right away with queen to b7, as you also need a defender for that knight on b4. Maybe you don't, maybe just plan on capturing on d3. But okay, after pawn to g3, pawn to e5, challenging the bishop. And now if you trade, then okay, the bishop will be defending the knight, so there's that. We have bishop back to e3. And now queen b7. Now white has to be very careful. If the position opens up, you could quickly get checkmated. So queen f2, adding a support there, and the bishop to e6. So with queen f2, although it's a defensive move, it's also an attacking move. That f7 pawn could easily come under attack, and the bishop on e6 will be doing a fine job at defending it. We have rook to d2. Now also adding more support to the c2 pawn, and knight to d7. Now the knight can be shifted over to c5, but also maybe you have ideas of f6, f5. It's a very dynamic position, so any move is a move. And here we have pawn to b3. Now here pawn to f5, it's hard to say anything against this move. Pawn to b3 was played probably to prepare pawn to f5 and to prevent the bishop from coming to c4. But okay, after b3, Vasyl just goes knight to c5. And here, okay, it's a really complicated position. We could also mention knight captures on d3, and then maybe playing f5, like captures, and then you strike with pawn to f5 is also very, very nice for black. But Vasyl decided to go for knight to c5. He puts even more pressure on that d3 bishop. And the question is, what do you play here? Because it's not easy to dissect this position at all, especially with so little time on the clock. In the game, f captures on e5 was played, which makes a lot of sense. You open up the f file, and next you go after that bishop on e6. If you can eliminate the bishop, then the f7 pawn becomes weak. So in theory, it makes a lot of sense. But bishop captures on c5 was sort of a move that has to be played. And the point is that after rook captures on c5, now bishop to c4, and rather the problem with the entire position is that it's equal. Most of the lines here are equal, and it's just very hard to navigate it. Rook to f8, now let's say knight a4 goes after the rook, rook to c8, and now even just a nice c3, and the position is, well, I want to say equal, but extremely complicated. Look at this, pawn to d5, You can capture, e captures, you can play knight captures on d5, and now pawn to f5, and it seems like, okay, surely white is winning this, but then you see a move like rook d8, and no, white is not winning this. Again, it's an equal position, and that's the problem. Aram and the Vasyl have very little time to calculate all of this. If you capture the bishop, then look at this. F captures opens up the rook's attack to the queen, and there's just no good square for your queen, and the queen has to, keep an eye on that g2 square. So if you play queen to e1, all of a sudden just rook captures on f1, queen captures, and now knight to e3. And that's it. Where does the queen go to? You have to go to f2 to keep an eye on checkmate, and then just rook captures on d2, and the white can resign. So it's very double-edged. Anything can happen here. But f captures on e5 was played, and this allows Vasyl to sort of improve his position a little bit by going knight c captures on d3, which he doesn't play, but again, we will show it because it's a lot of fun. D captures on e5, and now, okay, you get a position like this. And if pawn to d4, pawn to f5, again, good luck calculating this. Pawn to d5, bishop d7, it's a complete mess of a position. But okay, after f captures on e5, d captures on e5 was played by Vasyl, and now comes bishop to c4. Again, makes sense. You want to eliminate the bishop and then just capture on f7. So rook g7, and now bishop to h6, going after Vasyl's rook. And you could play something like rook to h7, definitely, not impossible. And then if bishop captures, you play f captures. And then even a move like bishop to f8, which looks wild, doesn't really do anything. There's no threat. It's just, it just looks nice. And black can just go for a counterattack. Rook to d8, and then let's say captures, and you really have nothing better than to trade here. Bishop captures, queen captures, and if anything, we prefer this position for black. So it's not a bad move, but Vasyl goes for the more ambitious one. He plays knight captures on e4, and you're probably thinking, well, of course he does. I mean, it's attacked twice by the knight and by the queen, so why wouldn't you? Well, there's a rook hanging on g7. Maybe that's the reason. But okay, knight captures on e4, and now Vasyl just plays queen captures on e4. And the problem here is that there are so many good options for white. That's a lie. There's only one, but they're seemingly good. So the question is, what would you play here as white? I'm not going to tell you the evaluation or anything, but what would you play here? There's only one good move for white here in this position. I think it's great to test your senses and skills. So while I give you a couple of seconds. So the only move that holds this for white, believe it or not, is knight to d4. And while I will discuss this, I just want to show you what happens if you play bishop captures on g7. If you capture the rook, then you get bishop to c5. And okay, looks very nice, but you're not winning a queen. Of course, white will block with knight d4. White just captured the rook on g7. So it's okay to give a little bit of material back. But after bishop captures on d4, let's say rook captures and queen captures, there's c3. And the c3 is, you have to see all of this and find this engine move c3 to even be able to maybe hold, but not really. And after queen captures on f2, king captures, let's say bishop captures on c4, b captures, and you move the knight, you have this position where, yeah, I mean, okay, you're down only one pawn, but this is a pass pawn, this is a pass pawn, these two are doubled, so you're going to lose them. So it's a winning position for black. So that's why capturing the rook is not an option. Knight d4, on the other hand, is very nice because, for one, you don't have to worry about bishop c5. And if you capture the knight, then again, you don't have to worry about bishop to c5, as there's a pawn on d4. So you can just enjoy a nice rook on g7. So what you would have to do after knight to d4 is play bishop to c5 right away. But now you can defend it with pawn to c3. And now if he captures on d4, you just play c captures on d4, as there's a rook hanging on g7. And now black is either completely lost, or black has to play queen g2, and then it's a draw. And then after we trade everything, let's say captures, rook to f6, bishop captures on c4, d captures on c5, rook to g6, you attack and defend. Rook captures, of course, f captures on g6, and after b captures on c4, rook captures on c5, you get something like this, where, okay, black is up a pawn, but the g pawn is tripled. So this is, I mean, a draw. But yeah, after queen captures on e4, there is so much to calculate here, with Aram having less than 3 minutes on the clock, and he doesn't go for either of these options. He goes for bishop captures on e6. And the problem is that he's now losing the game. Vasyl plays f captures on e6, bishop captures on g7. He does grab the rook, but now bishop to c5. We have knight to d4 and bishop captures on d4. We have rook captures on d4, queen captures on d4, and now pawn to c4. Okay, Aram also gets the passed c pawn, but knight back to c6, and not a lot for Aram to do here. He finds bishop to h6, which is, fairly tricky if you don't find the only move that wins the game for you. It's hard to say. They've been playing it for such a long time, so it's not easy. It's possible to make a mistake, but just for fun, feel free to pause the video and try to find the only move that wins the game for Vasyl while I give you a couple of seconds. Of course, it is queen captures on f2. If you don't trade queens and you allow something like bishop to e3, you're gonna lose the game. Or even worse, if you play something like queen e4, which looks like you're paralyzing white because the white queen cannot move. The white queen can move. You get a check, and then after the king moves, bishop check, and that's it. You get checkmated. So you have to trade queens here. Queen captures on f2. We have rook captures, and now knight to d4. And Vasyl is up only one pawn, but his position is so much better. And something I probably haven't mentioned here is that in this tournament, you don't get additional time after you make move 40. So there's no like 30 minutes extra once you reach move 40. It's just, the same 30 seconds increment over and over. So rook to f8 with check, king to d7, rook to f7 check, and king to c6. Even objectively, Vasyl's position is so much better than the top 6 moves in any position are just winning for him. So it would take a miracle for Vasyl not to win this. We have pawn to b4, controlling the Vasyl's king. We have rook to b8 and bishop to f8, now defending the b4 pawn. Knight to f3 with check. And here you see how bad white's position really is. If you go to the corner, that king is never seeing the light of day again. And also there's just rook d8, so you can resign on the spot. And after knight f3, king f2 was played, but this also isn't that much better. Look at this. Knight g5 attacks the rook. The rook has to defend the bishop on f8, and you really don't have all that many squares. All except f6 are taken, so you have to play rook to f6, but you can't. If you play rook f6, knight e4 check, forks the rook and king, and you can resign. So knight to g5 was played. Here attacking the rook, and then rook g7. And okay, it seems like you're trading, but not really, as rook captures bishop comes with check. So here Aram is down a full piece now, but he still continues to play. Like I said, there's no additional time that you can get other than the 30 seconds increment. So it is not impossible for Vasyl to either blunder or lose on time. It has happened in the past, and of course Aram will, try. Rook f5, we have pawn to c5, knight f3, just going after the h2 pawn. If Vasyl captures it, he can promote the h pawn, so seems like a good plan. Rook a7, knight captures on h2, rook captures on a6 with check. We have king to d5 and rook to d6 with check. King c4 and pawn to c6. And okay, there's a passed pawn on c6, so it's not nothing. But the problem is it's very, very easy to stop it. We have rook to f8, and rook captures on e6. Of course, if you see c7 out on the board, you don't play a weird move and then allow rook to d8. You have to go rook to c8 to win the game. But okay, rook captures on e6. We have knight to f3, now making room for the passed h pawn. So rook h6, you have to stop that pawn. King captures on b4, king to e3, we have king to c5, and now pawn to c7. Vasyl just played rook to c8, and he was in this position on move 57 that Aram Hakobyan resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So a pretty crazy game, and yeah, I think it's due to the fact that otherwise, when you're down a piece, maybe. But even though it's completely lost, there are players like I even do that. I never resign. Like I will not resign until I have a move to play. Because players who are so winning, and when you have a completely winning position, your brain just shuts off if you're not like a really professional player and you're able to be fully aware for the entire game. I've had many games where even in classical my opponents would just be like plus 10, and I would just continue playing with focus, and they blunder. So it's not impossible, and it does happen at the very top level. So I see nothing wrong with continuing to play even though you're down a piece. But okay, some people are against that. They say, okay, you're lost, you should just resign. But that's why there's the internet, so we can have discussions. But yeah, very interesting game, and again, not a lot of time, not enough time to calculate all of this out. They did really well. Vasyl did better, and thus taking the full point. And again, I think I mentioned this in the previous video. Vasyl already lost 3 games with the white pieces, but he seems to be winning with the black pieces. He's now on 4 points out of 8. So he's on 50%, and if he does well in the final round, he could finish on a 5 out of 9, which is, for someone of his level, not great, but, it would be finishing on a high note. But he does have the white pieces in the final round, so we'll see how it goes. And yeah, if you have any favorite games or players that you would like for me to check out, use that hashtag suggestion, and I'll be more than happy to do it. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Henan Escalante Jr., Robert Kiefer, Edmund Freeman, Stephen Wentworth, and the Nightmaster Bishop for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.